There's something ancient and profoundly rooted in the idea that two human beings can be destined, if we dare to use such a word, for each other. Not because of fantasy or fairy tales, but because of something real, psychological, and deeply biological that governs how we relate to others. When two people are soulmates, it is not merely about shared interests or mutual attraction. It's about resonance, a kind of invisible thread pulled taut between two psyches that have, in some form or another, been shaped to fit together. Like two keys cut from the same mold, wandering through the chaos of life until they click into place. When that happens, it's not usually dramatic. In fact, it often begins quietly, even unexpectedly. But something inside begins to stir, a sense of familiarity, of recognition, not in the way you recognize a face from a magazine or a movie, but in the way your soul recognizes a place it once called home. This isn't spiritual romanticism. This is the psychology of deep connection, the neuroscience of attachment, the echo of shared values, harmonized emotional pacing, and complementary temperaments. These are not accidents, signals from the subconscious that this person matters more than others. This kind of connection cannot be easily broken because it does not exist on the surface. It's embedded into the psychological structure of the individuals involved. What does that mean? It means when storms come, and they always do, it is not surface level chemistry that will hold things together. It's the architecture underneath, that shared moral foundation, that respect for the other's soul, that ability to suffer together without disintegrating. That is the magnetic force. That is the gravity of the soul's design. And no matter how far apart these individuals drift, emotionally or physically, there is an almost inevitable pull that keeps drawing them back. Let's explore this further. In life, we encounter many people. Some spark intrigue, others desire, and still others provoke temporary obsession. But the soulmate is different. They are not a spark. They are a steady flame, and that flame is fueled by a shared direction, a life aimed at something meaningful, not just pleasurable. Most relationships fail not because people stop loving each other, but because they were never aligned in purpose. Soulmates are aligned not just in personality, but in path. Their ambitions do not have to be identical, but their deeper purpose, the drive for truth, growth, contribution, echoes across both lives. You might think soulmates should never separate, but that's not how it works. Soulmate relationships are often tested more fiercely than others. Why? Because such a connection exposes everything. It reveals your vulnerabilities, your unhealed wounds, your flaws. It's not a comfortable mirror, it's a raw one. And not everyone can handle that. That's why some people, even after meeting their soulmate, retreat. They're not running from the person. They're running from the responsibility of being fully seen. But here's the educational truth. Separation isn't the death of the bond. It's often its greatest teacher. When soulmates separate, their internal worlds remain marked. Time passes, new experiences unfold, but the memory and imprint of that bond linger. This isn't some poetic notion, it's how the brain works. Emotional memories tied to high-stakes connections get stored differently, more intensely, more durably. And when the time is right, if both individuals have done their inner work, they return. They don't just return to each other, they return as better, more complete versions of themselves. That is why nothing can truly separate soulmates. Not because the world doesn't try, but because the individuals keep growing toward each other. In the same way, magnets cannot help but be pulled toward a compatible pole. Soulmates find each other again and again. This magnetic energy is not mystical. It is a psychological inevitability for those who are ready to carry its weight. the weight of truth, the weight of devotion, the weight of full exposure. Do not underestimate what that requires, because it means becoming the kind of person who can recognize and protect such a rare connection. Many people crave soul-deep love, but few are ready to receive it. Fewer still are prepared to maintain it. The question isn't whether soulmates exist. The question is whether you are becoming the version of yourself who can magnetize that kind of bond. And it's not about waiting passively for someone to arrive. It's about preparing actively to be worthy of what you seek. And preparation involves truth-telling. It involves sacrificing cheap pleasures for lasting fulfillment. It involves becoming emotionally literate, intellectually honest, spiritually grounded. When you do that, something fascinating begins to happen. You start repelling what is false and attracting what is real, including people who are on that same path. And that's where soulmates meet, not in the realm of fantasy, but in the battlefield of discipline and desire, of accountability and aspiration. When both individuals are walking toward wholeness, they eventually collide. And when they do, it feels inevitable, because it is. Their choices made it so. Not chance, not fate, but intentional becoming. So yes, soulmates are drawn to each other like magnets, not because of mystical forces outside of us, but because of conscious transformation within us. Nothing can separate them, not permanently, because their bond is forged at the level of truth, not illusion, at the level of growth, not dependency. And in a world full of distractions and distortions, that kind of connection is not only rare, it's revolutionary. There exists a curious phenomenon in human relationships that defies explanation through conventional means. Something far deeper than chemistry or compatibility. Something that stirs beneath the surface of language and logic. When we speak of soulmates, it's tempting to veer towards sentimentality, to romanticize the concept into something otherworldly or magical. But to truly understand why two people can feel magnetically drawn to each other, we have to strip away the fantasy and get honest about what's actually happening beneath the surface. Because at the core of what people describe as soul connection lies a deep psychological pull of resonance. And it's far more grounded and more powerful than most realize. This kind of resonance does not emerge from shared hobbies, favorite songs, or matching communication styles. It's not about how well you laugh together or how effortlessly conversation flows. Those things are pleasant, but they're not the foundation. The foundation is built on alignment at the deepest levels of personality, values, emotional processing, and internal narrative. When two people truly click in a way that sustains itself over time, it is often because their internal structures are attuned. They see the world through similar lenses, not identically, but in ways that complement and reinforce each other's worldview. They are not clones, they are kindred structures. At the psychological level, we are shaped by a complex network of early experiences, beliefs, emotional associations, and patterns of coping. Every person walks through life carrying invisible architecture, belief systems, emotional reflexes, attachment templates. Some of this structure is conscious, much of it is unconscious, and the remarkable thing is that when we meet someone whose internal structure harmonizes with ours, we sense it long before we can explain it. There's a familiarity that defies experience, a pull toward them that feels like gravity, not because they are perfect or flawless, but because they resonate with who we are at our core, or who we are trying to become. This resonance creates a sense of safety, not the kind of safety that encourages stagnation, but the kind that invites growth. When two people experience this, there is often a strange feeling of recognition. It's as if the relationship isn't beginning, but continuing. This is not a delusion. It is the mind and body responding to patterns it recognizes as significant. It's your subconscious identifying that this person fits a blueprint you've been carrying quietly inside you, maybe for years. But this kind of fit doesn't come from coincidence. It comes from mirroring, not in a shallow sense, but in a way that reflects deeper truths. They mirror your strengths and also your wounds. They challenge you in the places you've built walls and soften you in the places you've grown rigid. There is something in their presence that invites you to be more than what you were yesterday. That is the hallmark of psychological resonance. It awakens what is dormant and strengthens what is alive. Not because the other person completes you, but because they activate you. What people often fail to understand is that this resonance is not about comfort. It's not always easy. In fact, it can be deeply unsettling. Because to meet someone who sees you, not just the version you project to the world, but the version buried underneath your defense mechanisms, is to experience exposure, and exposure demands honesty. That's why not everyone is ready for this type of connection, because it doesn't allow for games. It doesn't tolerate masks. It pushes you toward emotional maturity. It demands internal order. And for those who are not prepared, that can be terrifying. But for those who are ready, it is one of the most profound experiences life has to offer. The truth is, resonance is not manufactured. You cannot fake it. You cannot strategize your way into it. It either exists or it doesn't. And when it does, it overrides so many of the superficial factors we've been taught to prioritize. Physical attraction matters, of course. Shared interests matter. But when you're in the presence of someone who aligns with your inner architecture, those things become secondary. Because what you're feeling is not just desire, it's recognition. It's the feeling of being understood without needing to explain yourself. It's the freedom to be fully known without the fear of being rejected. That is what makes it magnetic. Not because it demands attention, but because it earns trust. But perhaps what is most powerful about psychological resonance is that it's not static. It deepens. Over time, if both people remain open, the bond becomes more refined, more precise, more calibrated. You begin to intuit things about the other person that even they may not fully understand. You can feel their shifts in mood without needing words. You begin to anticipate their fears, support their dreams, challenge their blind spots. It's not codependence, it's interdependence rooted in mutual evolution. And this kind of bond does not dissolve easily because it is not held together by circumstance. It is held together by insight. This is why when you separate two people who share this kind of connection, something lingers. Even if they part ways for a time, even if circumstances drive a wedge between them, the resonance doesn't disappear. Because resonance is not a physical tether, it is an energetic alignment between two minds, two histories, two futures. It's why they think of each other at the same time. It's why they dream of each other. It's why they remember things others forget. Because the connection is not stored in memory, it's imprinted in identity. And in this way, soulmates are not just lovers or partners. They are mirrors, teachers, catalysts. And when you meet someone who truly resonates with your soul, you're not just encountering another person, you're encountering a deeper version of yourself. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to forget, because the soul doesn't forget what helped it awaken. The mind doesn't forget what made it sharper. The heart doesn't forget what made it brave. That's why the psychological pull of resonance feels like magnetism, because it doesn't come from fantasy, it comes from truth. And truth, when it's shared between two people, creates a gravity all its own. Life is not a smooth, linear journey. It is unpredictable, turbulent, and often brutally unforgiving. Relationships, especially the ones that matter most, are not immune to this chaos. In fact, they are often forged within it. When two people share a deep connection, what many refer to as a soulmate bond, they are not automatically shielded from trials or hardship. On the contrary, the depth of their bond is often revealed and refined precisely through those very storms. And it is in these moments of separation, misunderstanding, and adversity that we begin to understand the resilience of true connection. Because the chaos doesn't destroy it, it tempers it, it tests it, and ultimately it pulls it back into alignment, often stronger than before. When people talk about soulmates being meant to be, they often imagine a seamless path, but that's a fantasy. Any relationship that matters will be challenged, not once, repeatedly. Life throws real difficulties into the mix. Timing misaligns, circumstances change, personal demons arise. And when those challenges surface, even the most profound bond can be strained, emotions flare, words get misunderstood, fear creeps in. At times, the distance between two connected souls can feel like a chasm. It can be weeks, months, even years before they find their way back to each other, if they do at all. But here's the thing. If the bond is real, if the connection is grounded in psychological truth and not fleeting desire, then chaos does not erase it. It only buries it temporarily. And in time, often in ways we least expect, the magnetic return begins. This magnetic return is not about nostalgia or unfinished business. It's not about longing for what once was. It's about a gravitational force that pulls two people back toward one another when both have grown enough to meet again, truly meet on equal ground. Sometimes separation is necessary. Sometimes it's the only way people evolve into the versions of themselves capable of sustaining the connection. Trials introduce a brutal but essential kind of clarity. When the noise fades, when the emotion simmers, what remains is what's true. And if, after all the dust has settled, the thought of the other person still feels like home, still echoes through the corridors of your mind and soul, then it wasn't chaos that ended it. It was chaos that clarified it. The world is full of people who walk away from something meaningful the moment it becomes difficult. They confuse friction with incompatibility. But friction is not the enemy. It is a sign of movement, of energy. When two souls collide in authenticity, there will be friction because the presence of one unsettles the unhealed places in the other. That's not dysfunction, that's growth trying to happen. But most people aren't taught how to endure that, so they run. They label the chaos as toxic, the conflict as failure. They don't realize that true connection often comes with disruption because it's trying to strip away everything false in its path. That's why soul-level relationships are rarely quiet. They wake you up, they stretch your emotional bandwidth. And if you're not ready, the trials will overwhelm you. But if you are, those very trials become stepping stones. They teach you what matters. They reveal your shadow. They expose your wounds. And through that process, you either become bitter and closed or more open and capable of deeper love. Soulmates who are separated by chaos but drawn back together over time are often people who chose the latter, who endured the suffering and came out wiser, more patient, more understanding, more grounded in who they are and what they're willing to fight for. You have to understand that when two people share a deep resonance, the chaos doesn't cancel it, it activates it. The trials don't destroy the bond, they awaken its capacity. But that capacity can only be fulfilled when both people are ready. And readiness is not about timing on a calendar. It's about psychological maturity, about emotional regulation, about becoming strong enough to hold something fragile without breaking it. Many times, the first version of the relationship isn't the final version. It's just the beginning, the early collision, the testing ground. And only after both people have stepped into their full stature can the connection return. Not as a repetition of the past, but as a reimagining of the future. The magnetic return is not forced. It doesn't respond to manipulation, desperation, or control. It happens organically when both people have realigned with who they truly are. That realignment is what reactivates the bond. And the return is often quiet, unexpected. Sometimes it's a message out of nowhere, a chance encounter, a shared dream, or just a persistent inner voice that grows louder until it cannot be ignored. What's important to understand is that the return doesn't require perfection, it requires clarity. The chaos cleared the debris. Now what remains is what's real. People underestimate the strength of what is built through adversity. A connection that has been tested by time, challenged by distance, refined through misunderstanding, and yet remains unbroken. This is not fragile. This is not fantasy. This is forged. Two people who faced chaos and still find their way back to each other are not lucky. They are aligned, not just with each other, but with themselves. And when that happens, the bond becomes sacred, not because it was easy, but because it was earned. So if you find yourself pulled towards someone after the storms have passed, don't dismiss it. Pay attention. Not all returns are regressions. Some are revolutions. The bond may have been buried, but it was never broken. And in its return, there is an opportunity not just to love again, but to love better, wiser, freer, more fully. That is what the chaos was preparing you for all along. Not to destroy the connection, but to prepare you for the version of it that could actually last. Separation is one of the most misunderstood experiences in human connection. It's often perceived as a failure, a conclusion, a verdict handed down by circumstance or incompatibility. But when two people share something profound, something rooted in truth rather than illusion, then separation takes on a very different character. It stops being an ending and becomes something else entirely. A test, not a test of loyalty in the traditional sense, nor of time and space alone, but a test of internal evolution, a test of emotional development, a test of whether what was once a spark can mature into a flame that doesn't just flicker in the calm, but burns steadily through the storms. The truth is, when people are pulled apart, especially those who are deeply connected, it rarely happens out of malice or lack of care. More often it happens because the conditions weren't right, not externally, but internally. One or both individuals still had battles to fight within themselves. There were patterns that needed to break, self-awareness that needed to deepen, and separation becomes the stage where that growth either happens or doesn't. It's not punishment, it's preparation. Life sometimes puts distance between people, not because they don't belong together, but because they do. And neither of them is ready to bear the weight of that responsibility. Real connection demands more than emotional chemistry. It asks for stability, vision, and character. It asks for people who know who they are, what they value, and what they're capable of giving. Without that, even the most powerful bond becomes fragile. The connection might be real, but its expression can still be chaotic, riddled with projections, misunderstandings, and emotional volatility. And so, separation becomes necessary not as rejection, but as realignment. A pause, not a full stop. A space where each person can confront their individual darkness without bleeding it all over the one they love. What we don't often recognize is that love itself isn't always enough. Two people can love each other deeply and still not be able to function together yet. That doesn't mean the love is false. It means the foundation is unfinished, and the separation becomes the workshop, the classroom, the battlefield where each soul is forced to do its work alone. It's in that solitude where clarity begins to emerge. You begin to understand what mattered and what didn't, what was ego and what was truth, what you were holding on to for safety and what you're willing to fight for because it's sacred. That kind of clarity can't always be found in closeness. Sometimes it can only be found in distance. We live in a culture that measures success in relationships by constant presence. If someone walks away, it's assumed they've given up. But real love isn't proven by proximity, it's proven by depth. And sometimes the greatest act of love is allowing someone the space to grow, even if it means enduring silence. Sometimes walking away isn't abandonment, it's an act of faith. Faith that the connection, if it's meant to survive, will outlast the silence. Faith that when both people are finally ready, the bond will not need to be rebuilt. It will still be there, waiting, matured by time and tested by truth. People often underestimate how much healing has to happen individually before two people can sustain something meaningful together. We bring our childhoods into our relationships, our fears, our insecurities, our coping mechanisms. And when those things clash, love alone cannot fix it. Growth